20 babies left anonymously at one Tokyo hospital in a single year. Most of them were less than a day old. Japan's government has repeatedly warned about the country's falling birth rate. Not enough babies, not enough kids, not enough future workers. If babies are so desperately needed, why does a country of 123 million people have only two places where parents can safely and anonymously leave an infant? What happens when a baby is born and the parents feel like there is nowhere else to go? I'm Jeff Richards. This is Japan Today Spotlight, and this week we're looking at the country's baby hatches. But really, this is a story about what happens when a pregnancy doesn't fit the narrative a society expects. When people hear the term baby hatch, they usually picture something out of a movie, a box or a window in a wall. A stranger walks up, leaves something, and disappears. That's roughly right. In March 2025, a Tokyo medical facility called San-ikukai Hospital opened one. It's a dedicated space where a newborn can be left safely and anonymously. A buzzer alerts staff, a doctor checks the baby, and child welfare authorities take it from there, routing the infant to a medical facility, foster care, or eventual adoption. In its very first year, 20 infants came through it. The hospital also runs a separate program called Confidential Birth for women who want an actual hospital delivery but need their identity kept from all but a few designated staff. 20 women sought care under that system too, and 7 of them gave birth. But San-ikukai's director, Hitoshi Kato, put it simply when the facility opened. He said, "There's no end to tragic incidents such as babies being abandoned or fatally abused. We recognize that this is an urgent measure to prevent such situations." Here's where it gets surreal. Murakami-esque. Ryu, not Haruki. Before there was a door, there was a locker. Starting in the early 1970s and peaking through the 80s, Japanese newspapers regularly reported a grim wave of what they called coin locker babies. These were infants left in the public coin-operated luggage lockers common at train stations. Sometimes they were found alive. Often they weren't. At the peak, Japan's own mortality statistics recorded these cases in the dozens every year. The first response wasn't medical. It was architectural. Lockers got moved into more visible spots. Station staff started patrolling them. The coin locker baby cases dropped through the early 1980s, not because the underlying problem went away, but because that one specific method got harder. The lockers changed. The problem didn't disappear. Getting an actual hospital to try something different wasn't easy. Critics claimed a hatch would actively encourage abandonment rather than prevent it. Some argued it violated a child's fundamental right to know their own biological background. Even the Prime Minister at the time, Shinzo Abe, called it unforgivable for a parent to give up a child that way. GK Hospital in Kumamoto opened its hatch anyway in 2007 and called it Konotori no Yurikago, or the Stork's Cradle. For nearly 2 decades, the hospital operated the only facility of its kind in the country. As of last year, about 170 infants have been placed in its care. There's a steep financial layer to this issue, and it rarely makes the headlines. Japan's national health insurance treats a normal birth the way it treats a haircut. It's not classified as an illness, so it's not covered. Parents instead receive a lump sum childbirth allowance, currently set at 500,000 yen. For several years, the allowance has been lower than the average cost of childbirth. The actual national average cost of a standard delivery passed 518,000 yen in 2024, and in Tokyo, it runs closer to 625,000 yen. The government says it wants to fix that. Starting this fiscal year, officials announced plans to make standard childbirth effectively free, either by folding it into public insurance or by raising the allowance to match real-world market costs. As of this spring, the structural details were still being worked out. A C-section, notably, already counts as a medical treatment, so it's covered under insurance with the usual 30% copay. And if a pregnancy happens and someone decides not to continue it, abortion in Japan is not covered by insurance under almost any circumstances. That typically runs somewhere between 100,000 and 250,000 yen and paid in cash. Under Japan's Maternal Health Act, a married woman generally needs her spouse's consent before an abortion can be performed. An unmarried woman who isn't in a de facto marriage needs only her own consent. Look at the full sequence. Prevention costs money out of pocket. Ending a pregnancy also costs money out of pocket, and for some married women, the consent requirement can create another barrier. Carrying a child to term can cost more than the childbirth allowance currently covers. At nearly every stage, the system asks for resources from a woman in crisis that she may not even have. Money, a cooperative partner, or a supportive family. Against that backdrop, the fact that a baby hatch is entirely free starts to make sense. Now, money is only part of it. Pregnancy outside of marriage still carries real weight here, and domestic adoption remains relatively uncommon compared with most Western countries. Sex education in Japan has long been the subject of debate, particularly regarding contraception and pregnancy. There's also Japan's koseki, or its family registry. Combine that pressure with the cost of it all, and what you get is something that doctors call an isolated birth. That's a woman giving birth completely alone with nobody else even aware she was pregnant. The government's own numbers show how vulnerable newborns can be. In fiscal 2023, 48 children under 18 died from documented abuse, not counting family murder-suicides. 33 of them were babies under 12 months old, which is the highest share on record. About half of those newborns died within a single day of being born. That's the story beneath this story. The hatch is just a rare space where the outcome can be different. Koichi Miyatsu was placed in the Kumamoto hatch at age 3 on its very first day of operation back in 2007. His biological mother had died in an accident when he was 5 months old, and he had been raised by relatives before they brought him to the hospital. Yukiko Tajiri, then the hospital's director of nursing, was the first person to care for him when he was discovered inside. Miyatsu was raised afterward by foster parents, and he has spoken publicly about his story since he was a teenager. Life after the baby hatch is far more important. He means the practical questions. Will a child grow up in a state institution or a family? Will they ever know their name, their medical history, or where they actually came from? Tajiri, now in her 70s, still works closely with him to raise awareness. And she says, we have an obligation to tell people about life and how it should be lived. None of this makes baby hatches uncontroversial. Critics maintain that a child has a fundamental right to know their origin. Anonymity erases that identity before the child is old enough to have a say. They also argue that a hatch can make it easier for an abusive father or a controlling family to quietly pressure a woman into giving up a baby rather than fixing the underlying problem. Support, opponents say, should show up long before a newborn is in a hospital basket. Better counseling, real financial help for single mothers, and sex education that isn't legally hobbled. Supporters generally argue that their answer is just narrower. In a perfect system, nobody would need this. But this isn't a perfect system. People panic. Pregnancies get hidden. Babies get born alone. A hatch doesn't fix what led there. It just means fewer of those nights end with a baby found somewhere far worse. The harder question isn't whether Japan wants more babies. It's whether it supports the people who find themselves in crisis before those babies are born. A baby hatch doesn't answer that question. It simply makes it impossible to ignore. As usual, all sources are linked in the show notes. From the Japan Today newsroom here in Tokyo, I'm Jeff Richards. See me next time.